lot of you may already be experts in using not only Schoology discussions, but online discussions in general. At the end of the session, we'll open up the lines. There's a hand-raising feature you'll see in your control panel. Pop up your hand at the end of the session if you want to have some mic time and share something that you're doing in Schoology or something that seems like it really works, because there's certainly a lot of different ways to use Schoology than we're covering today. So Joe, I'm going to go ahead and turn off our webcam here so everyone can see the screen, and we'll join you again at the end of the session. To start off, before we get into the actual discussions, let's cover some nuts and bolts. This is one of the details in a Schoology course that can easily be missed, and something that may have been covered maybe in that first PD session, but it's one of those things that may not stick, and it's great to revisit from the get-go. What you see here is a screenshot of our course options. I'm going to pop into my course, Joe, so we can see really right where that is. In our course, you should see this course options drop-down. Very faint drop-down. Many people, your teachers who are just getting started with Schoology, may not have even noticed this. What we want to visit is this Edit Privacy Course Settings option here. Now, this top part is our privacy settings. Those are already usually set for you by your district or organization administrators. I want to bring your attention to the bottom of the screen, Other Settings. Now, Joe, I believe this would be the default configuration. The first two about posting updates. The third option is what we want to bring your attention to, edit discussion responses. By default, all members, meaning your students and the faculty or teachers, can post to discussions and also edit their responses. Let's say that there's a typo or something. However, with a lot of the academic material we are looking at today, you want to see the changes that are made to a discussion prompt, especially if you intended to grade them. Because I don't want my students to post a response and then, oh, you know, check out the other responses, maybe something seems a little bit more clever, and then change the response. So this is often what I recommend people to do first. Now you can change this at any time. It'll change it for all the discussions in your course. Most people shift it over here and leave it, but I could see, Joe, maybe a Schoology ninja coming here and fiddling with it as needed, depending on the nature of the discussion, if it's graded or not. Don't forget to save those changes. Now, the other area I want to show you is the Moderate tab. This serves two functions. One, the one we are most concerned with, is that this will actually list any items that have been deleted in your course. Let's take a look at that. That's this area down here in my screen. Ivan deleted his post. You see he originally posted it May 20th, 4:41, and deleted it in June. So I see the post, when it was posted, and when it was deleted. This is important because once your students realize, well, they can't edit their post, they might just delete them and create a new one. So this is great to know that you always have a record of what was deleted, especially if there is some sort of inappropriate behavior. Joe, I know some people who like to keep this idea in their back pocket. Some of them bring it up on the screen to show their students day one. So there's no funny business.
Yeah, I could say when I was teaching, this is something I would absolutely have shown my students. I was never really interested in keeping it as a back pocket tool, but I could see that being a tool for some people.
Now, Joe, this area also serves another function. What we just mentioned, that just happens by default. You don't have to do anything about that. But there's also this enable moderation link there. Can you tell me a little bit about that link and just your feelings about discussion moderation as opposed to just what is happening right now?
Yeah, I would say, so for the function of the enable moderation link that's there, essentially every post that's coming through in your course is going to be flagged for moderation. So you'll have to come in as the instructor in that course and review that post and approve it or deny it. That can be a blessing or a nightmare, I guess, if you have hundreds of posts coming through and having to verify and approve every one of them. So it can be nice in small doses.
Great. I totally agree with that. Some people only enable moderation if there's a foul. But we've talked about this a lot, that any sort of online conduct and discipline should be dealt with the exact same way as something inappropriate that was said out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Two sets of rules, not a good idea. One set of rules way better. So really that's the only housekeeping we have to do with just general setup. Okay? Let's get to the fun stuff. This entire session is about using discussions for non-discussions, I might say, for other purposes, using them creatively, using them as basically a place for students to share information. The essential difference between assignments and discussions, assignments being a one-to-one relationship with the teacher, and discussions being basically a collaborative space where all the students can share information with each other. So that does not need to be limited to simply responding to a discussion prompt. So let's think about this as a collaboration space for the rest of the session. Now, in this very basic example, Joe, a lot of people talk about using parking lots for their students. The idea being that during a lecture or even in between classes, in the non-digital world, a student could write a question on a post-it note and leave it on the teacher's desk, and they could be revisited at the beginning of the next school day in a non-digital world. Well, creating a parking lot in a discussion is a really efficient way to handle that same behavior, just a place for students to park their question. Now, of course, there's messaging in Schoology. They could just send you a message. But the nice thing about this is that students get to see each other's questions and get to have an awareness that there are questions, and can like people's questions, or I think of it as upvoting them, to give you as an instructor a bit more of a view into how well the students comprehended what was covered. I really like that collaborative nature of putting a parking lot as a discussion. In a similar vein, you could do the exact same thing with a simple study hall discussion prompt. And what I mean by that is, again, creating a discussion that is really just a placeholder. Big exam coming up. Well, what if you have students that are stuck on a question or just are not sure where a piece of study material ended up? Maybe they lost a study guide or are not sure some specifics that were covered. This provides them a place to ask those questions. Joe, I bet that, and everyone on the line, I bet that as I say that you're thinking, well, all of my students just, they just SMS each other anyway. They're already using all sorts of other avenues to ask each other questions, get help. I certainly was at some points and had friends who were in classes where they just did not really have much of a network, not a big social base. And really, sure, they could ask their friends, but their friends aren't in the class with them. I like the idea of creating a space that is just in the course itself to facilitate peer support when you're coming up to a big exam, because it eliminates that hurdle of needing to make friends and create a social network first, right? And then as a teacher, I think I get to observe that and see that peer support happen. I assume in the classroom you would probably see students figuring out how to peer support themselves with or without the technology you provided.
Yeah, with or without the technology, they do tend to find ways to excuse me, support each other in, I guess, limited ways. But what I find with these collaboration space discussions, particularly in these parking lots, when I first started using it and going away from when I went to a blended classroom, some things had happened that I had absolutely expected. I had expected more questions to be asked. I had expected more questions outside of the classroom, which is an amazing capability. Inside the classroom, they couldn't do it. What I wasn't necessarily expecting was that students were going in, and students that didn't even speak to each other were asking or answering each other's questions, asking questions on top of that, and it really just evolved into what I was looking for in my classroom at any moment was that spirit of inquiry and clinging to that. And it really does help facilitate that, and it does actually help create a more academic forum and a new network of students that are going to be able to connect with each other and realize that that this is a great forum for them to connect and learn from each other. So I think I even learned from it.
And as you're talking, Joe, I'm thinking about one of my passions are thinking about the kids who have a bit of a hard time connecting to other children, and I find that sometimes someone doesn't help somebody in an in-person social situation because their other friends are looking. And this is especially true in like early junior high levels when kids are, there's some viciousness happening at certain levels. That we may be friends in class, but if my other buddies from my elementary school are watching, maybe I'm not going to be so nice to you. That discussion board in that safe space of the class also lets all those students just be who they are when they're in that safe zone of your class too. I think that safe space is really important and not to be undersold.
Oh, absolutely.
Great. Well, that is a really easy one to get to do both of those because they require almost no prompt at all and can just be a regular thing that happens. Let's get into some more specifics. Now, this is just getting involved here. Actually, let me just refresh my screen here because my slide deck does not look updated.
And while you're doing that, I can just jump into, with the parking lot discussion questions, I often get asked where's a good place to put that in the course.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I've toyed with a couple different ideas, and I think it depends on how you set your course up. I personally like to keep a parking lot at the very top of my course. It sits there, students know where to go for it. However, that can somewhat become unmanageable over a long period of time, so keeping them in key areas in units that you've built out within folders so that they pertain particularly to that specific area.
So if I have a Unit 1 folder, that parking lot might be the first thing that you always see in a unit folder?
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. So there are, Joe, we have both, and I think everyone on this call, we've read a lot of books about blended learning, about discussion boards, how they can be used, kind of endless blogs about the value of them. Where I want to shift to now is talking about how we can look at different discussion board templates, if you will, as a way to deliver professional development to introduce other Schoology features to late adopters. I think when we find something cool like a discussion board, something intriguing, something that you can really build into the curriculum, but also find a feature to hang on to that idea, it really sticks. So the rest of this, now we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about discussion boards that can actually help you as someone who is helping implement Schoology teach features while you're teaching something else. So the highlight here is the ability to add links and attachments and other documents to your comments. So this is, you see my comment board down here, and at the bottom you'll always see the ability to upload files or attach links with a comment. So here's a sample, a crowdsourcing research project. Joe, as we were talking about this, you suggested, well, here's a good difficult question. What were the series of events that brought about the Cold War, and how did both sides perceive those events differently, right? Now, juicy questions so far, but right now that's just a normal Schoology discussion, I'd say, pretty straightforward. To level this up, what we would ask our students to do is attach a link or a file to the place, probably on the internet, where you found this information. Okay, so respond, but also include the reference, okay, where this came from. Now, everyone on the phone right now, if I were to do this with my class, or you do it with your class, where do you think the majority of those links might come from? there's your question. Where do you think the majority of students would be linking to? And just like this morning, Gilda comes with a response, Wikipedia. Yes, probably. That's probably right. So that is actually kind of what you want in this situation, because you're able to use this topic to dig into parts of the Common Core that ask us to investigate the difference between primary sources and secondary sources and talk about Wikipedia. And after all these posts come in, I could have a homework assignment that asks my students to repost, now looking at the bibliography at the bottom of the Wikipedia articles and really try to dissect exactly where a piece of information came from, trying to get to that primary resource. And Joe, it occurs to me that that's kind of an interesting investigation in the topic of Cold War, because, well, what's the basis of propaganda, right?
Absolutely.
Ideas and positions without any actual backing. So this whole thing creates a really interesting feedback loop, and it's, in this topic I think it's pretty juicy instructionally, and from a PD side, without even anyone really thinking about it, we introduced the idea of attaching documents and links.
And then this topic, just for a discussion like this, is to me does wonders. I mean, you're looking at vetting the reliability of sources. People actually then students will actually have to then take ownership of what they're posting in there as well. So they'll have to be able to defend that. So they really are digging in, like Brad said, those Common Core aspects. But more than that, they are really looking at a life skill of being able to vet the reliability of resources, the credibility, understand what these, and how this can end up eventually applying to their own lives. So.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that another screen. That was the web view. This is the mobile view. If your students are on iOS, it's pretty similar on Android. They click over to the discussion itself, and then click that plus button, and then they have the ability to attach. And what I like about this show, this is really the view that students see more often than not, is that not only can they attach documents and links and things like that, but they can also take photo and video, right? Or they can go into their apps and pop into their Google Drive or something like that. So you could take this idea and just flip it over to a language class, a foreign language class, and have this entire thing be audio-based because of that ability to add attachments. So immediately we're doing a completely different thing here. Okay. Now, Joe, this idea came straight from you. Joe and I and Sarah sit all across from each other, and we have labeled Joe the king of embedding content. You had this idea of using a discussion to facilitate a virtual field trip. Talk me through this.
Yeah, so this actually came up weirdly in the car on the way to a professional development session. And I was thinking about a really dynamic way to showcase a couple different things. Embedding content inside of Schoology material types, allowing us to differentiate material types, enhance what is possible inside of within my classroom and outside of my classroom, and really bring the world into the classroom using digital tools. And then being, like I said, differentiating was a big deal as well. So I wanted to use a discussion type to create a virtual field trip, selecting a location and telling students we're going to go out to a virtual field trip, we're going to go to a location, we're all going to just go off unchaperoned, and with some guidance and some direction, have an experience, and then come back and we'll all collectively discuss that. So what we did was grab a Google image from the Google Maps Street View and embed that into a Schoology discussion type, and had students go through that, navigate. They can zoom in, they can spin around. It is totally 100% 360 degree, with the exception of the fact that you can't see where your feet would be most of the time. But yeah, you can navigate through, and there's a lot of different places on Google. Google has mapped out, obviously, most of I would say, a lot of the world, and now also inside of major locations like the Met, the British Museum, the Carnegie Hall, the Pyramids of Giza. So we can send people out to these locations, and Google does something like this with Google Expeditions, but we can bring these into Schoology and have these experiences, make them graded items, differentiate them. We can send students out to different groups, and then they can all come back and explain their experiences. Bradley and I were having this conversation before we started about how students go out to a field trip, particularly in a museum like the Met, they're not going to see everything. So, they talk about what they saw and the cool things that they were experiencing, and they share that on the bus on the way home. But we can do that virtually in this discussion question type, and really, I think, gain a lot more insight. When I've used this with people, they're zooming in, they're focusing on things. It's a level of engagement I've not seen in a lot of different types of materials.
So now that's really eye-catching. It really makes me think creatively outside the box. When explaining this to teachers and faculty, what I like about it is, again, we have an opportunity to show these attachment options. When you look at this discussion prompt, not only are we're taking that tour, but what are students to do at that point? As they go through this map, what I want them to do is take screenshots. I want them to find something that they are really interested in, or a piece of art that really stands out to them, and then take a screenshot of that image, and then come down here and post it. So they're all sharing something they discovered after getting lost in the museum. Right? Now, often I think of this part of the discussion as just a seed, a place to start. Depending on the age level of your students and what the actual lesson, where this falls in the curriculum, I could do a few different things after that. One option is, as I look at these, I'm not always going to be able to zoom in quite far enough to make out exactly what this says. I think I can make out a Chinese Buddhist sculpture, but I can't really see the century, right? So I could have students do some research and try to figure out where this actually comes from, what the story is with the sculpture, try to investigate what era this comes from. So after they've posted their image, the next day could be an investigation into where these things come from, because some people may have gone into the China section, some people may have gone to the Egypt section, some to the European Renaissance section. So that can be a really interesting seed to a longer research project. A lot of you do project-based learning at your organizations, and that could be a great starting place. A different way to go about that is, for the second posts, have students actually try to figure out where each other's items are coming from. So you post one item yourself, and then you have to look at someone else's post, and then again go back into the museum, follow it around until you find that item. You might at that point be incorporating a PDF of the museum's floor plan or something like that, if this is actually more exercise on mapping. So anyway, getting very interesting. Along that second line, if one of the hardest things at a museum is, I think instructionally, is getting students to just stop and actually read the information. So with that past scenario, Joe, you know what I think I would do? I would have students post an image of something they found, but then also post clues as to where they found it. This item is in the Far East, pre-Marco Polo. Okay, now I have some clues. Now this is getting interesting. And once students are starting to challenge each other in that discussion board, you almost get to this gamification place.
Oh, sure.
Students creating basically their own games and challenges. Now we are way far away from just a simple discussion. Great. So if you have not seen that before, this is Google Maps. Joe laughed at me because this is the way I do it. You could keep zooming in to a museum, but when you take your little Street View guy here, which is really hilarious, he just hangs onto your mouse. If you hover over a building and you see these blue lines, that means that the building is mapped inside. Just drop them in, and bam, we are inside the Met. So it's really, really fascinating ways to incorporate all that other digital media. We've talked a lot about files and links, just adding content.
Where to grab that for discussion?
Oh, that's a great point, Joe. Where would I actually find the embed code?
Yeah.
We click that menu here, the 3 dots, share or embed image. That's the share link, but that just brings us to this page. We actually want the embed image link there. That actually drops us right into it. In Schoology, we edit that discussion, and what's our favorite button of all of Schoology?
It's definitely the insert content button.
Absolutely. Insert content, image and media from the web. Always remember to click media. I feel like this is the mistake people make.
Yep.
And now it's asking for an embed code. Pop it there. Oh, that's not, I did not copy it correctly. There we go. You don't need to know anything about the ugly code. You just paste it in, and then you'll see your placeholder for that new room. So very interesting stuff.
And this is not limited to, a museum. You can do a street view. Anywhere where you see those blue lines, you can also take in photospheres. If they're little circles, you'll see.
Very cool. Okay. And Joe, it's probably worth saying that if you go to YouTube and look for our First Steps with Schoology video series, we talk a lot about embed codes and how to use them in different sites. Okay, so we have 2 discussions that talk about adding content. Let's talk about another option in discussions. The option that, shorthand, I call it require posts. When you create a discussion here, just jump to feature 1. You may have noticed these options down at the bottom. The one I want to bring your attention to is require posts, or require members to post before revealing others' responses. That is off by default. When you click it, it'll turn on and turn color. What this does is it grays out students' responses until that student, if I'm just going to the discussion board and Joe has already posted to it, I'm not going to be able to see Joe's response until I post myself. Okay, so this is basically requiring originality. To teach this, or to put into a real scenario, I use a discussion type called, either I call it patchwork or a cliffhanger. It's a creative writing project in which I start off a discussion prompt with the beginning of a story, preferably some kind of mystery, if you will. And then at the end I say, "You'll never believe me when I tell you what I saw on the other side of the fence," dun dun dun, or some sort of dot 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 situation. Students then come to this discussion and post the next part of the story, and they then also leave a cliffhanger. And then for homework, they come to it again, and then find someone else's storyline and finish it. So with one seed of a story, now if I have 30 students, I have 30 different possible stories that could happen. But this only works because students were not able to see how each other were continuing that cliffhanger moment. This is an actual example from one of my professional development sessions where people took the story along and others continued it. What I like about this as well, Joe, is I like the idea that one part of the discussion board can be in class, that first post, and then once my students get it, they understand how this works, then they can move on for homework, then continue other storylines.
Absolutely. I think that I constantly say it's, what you can do inside and outside of the classroom. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
You're not just limited to either one.
Absolutely. There are other, of course, other opportunities to use that require posts in other creative ways. This one I call the big reveal, where there's an initial part of the discussion prompt. Right now, in this scenario, Kylie Starr, she's the teacher or professor. You know that because she has a little star icon next to her name. In this, I'm asking my students, just without any research, nothing at all, no introduction, how would they feel about driving or being driven in a self-driving car, and explain why. This is a great kind of STEM prompt, right? Talking about engineering and design. So the first part of it, they just respond with no research. Now, I, as the teacher, have already posed follow-up questions, but my students are not going to be able to see that follow-up question until they respond. Okay, so they have no idea what's coming next. What actually does come next is an embedded TED Talk from the guy at Google who's in charge of the self-driving car program, explaining how the technology works. So the second part of the discussion is, after viewing this video, go back to your original response and comment to yourself how you now feel. Have your feelings changed? Have they not changed? But again, going a step further, really great discussion prompt is specific. So in this situation, students not only respond if their mind has changed, but they need to quote the video itself and provide a time code for that quote, right? You really want them to pull out that very specific research and include it. And then, I always talk about seeds for discussions. This could go a lot of different ways. They could then rebuttal someone else's post. They could go out on the internet and find scholarly articles against self-driving cars. This could go a lot of different ways at that point. But the idea of an initial prompt to get initial reactions and then providing further research is nice. And Joe, what we talked about with Sarah yesterday as we were planning this was how easily this kind of method could be applied to Socratic seminars. Mm-hmm. You had a variation on Socratic seminars in your history classes, right?
Yes.
How would that apply in this situation?
So with my variation of Socratic seminars, it was related to a prompt text or video or any type of historical evidence that would generate questioning, and then they would come up with 3 different levels of questioning based on significance, how it relates. A question that relates directly to that text or prompt, a question as it relates to that event, and then bringing it to how does it relate to my life or now? How does it impact my life or now? So these are things that can really generate a large amount of discussion, a large amount of reflection as well.
So in this sort of situation, if we were to apply that idea, maybe only the first prompt would be in the initial discussion description, where the next 2 question prompts might be hidden in that first comment that the students wouldn't see until they provided their initial gut reaction. So they didn't, I find sometimes, especially your best students will overthink something because they're already thinking about the third part of an assignment before the first part. Yeah, I bet you were in that boat. Okay, so those are 2 cool ways to introduce the idea of require posts. Now, the last one that I really like, actually we have 2 more features. Second to last is locking. Now, in a discussion prompt, let me pop back out here and go to another one. In a discussion prompt, where is this one? Let me go back into my inventions here, problem solving. You'll see at the bottom this lock icon. Okay, you'll also see this in assignments. This prevents students from adding new comments. Often people just use locking in relationship to due dates. So if this is due Wednesday night, I might have it locked Thursday morning, just to ensure no one can submit late work if that's against our policy. You'll see that in higher ed often. But what I like in this situation is this is a challenge for students. It's a math challenge for students to solve this problem. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with inquiry-based learning. Often in non-US countries, particularly in Japan, often mathematics is taught leading with the problem instead of the solution, letting students grapple with a mathematical problem that they actually have not been given the tools to solve yet. This follows that line of reasoning a little bit. Students are trying to solve this problem. I've only given them 10 minutes to solve it. And then after this, then I might give them an interactive worksheet, something like that, a small lecture and a workshop to actually learn the tools to solve this problem, right? But I want to capture the struggle. So I might have this lock, and not only lock, but lock automatically at a certain time. And that allows me just to preserve the student's frustration right where they were. And again, possibly for homework, I might unlock it again and now have students go back and solve the problem with this newfound knowledge. Because as I'm teaching it, I might use a totally different example with different numbers so that for homework they can apply that knowledge to this situation. So locking and unlocking strategically can be really interesting to capture students right where they are and for them to actually see their own growth happen. I think that's maybe the coolest part of it, of students be able to see simply where their mind was yesterday versus today. A small but potentially powerful idea. I call that a hive mind inquiry because this, I think, in a really nice situation, Joe, because it's discussion and everyone is viewing their responses, part of it, this challenge, could be that the whole class has to agree within 10 minutes what the solution is. So as a whole class or as a small group, they need to find one answer, and that makes it even more interesting.
And when you do that, it works. I mean, it may not work as far as getting the solution.
No,
but
that's not the point.
Yeah. That's just a prize at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
We did get a question for the big reveal question.
Sure.
Just systematically, what are we doing there to get that big reveal to show up after you post?
Oh, that's a great question.
What feature was it?
So we were using the require post feature, which is that sort of strange-looking icon at the end of the options. You turn that on there, and then when students will see your sponsor and your responses grayed out before they post. And that's how we're doing the reveal. Require post was intended for students not to see their responses, but they'll also not see your response. So you can leverage that feature for your own purposes to have a big reveal that displays after they post. So once Pam here posts, suddenly Kylie Starr's response will be revealed with that TED Talk linked. Great question. Okay, that idea of locking, the first example, Joe, we gave was very short term, is, lock it now, immediately, unlock it tomorrow, to dive further to apply knowledge. I also like the idea of thinking of that extremely long term. For those of you who teach seniors or college freshmen, we talk a lot about goal setting, the goals someone has for their participation in the classroom, in the specific class, their goals for their career, their 4 or 5 year goals, their 10-year goals. A very simple discussion that you can use that locking feature on is a time capsule discussion. Goal setting is a great use for that. Have students write what their personal goals are in that discussion and then lock it. And you're not going to unlock it for maybe 3 months, maybe not until the very end of the year, in which you can unlock it again and students can reflect back on that area and comment to their past selves. Okay, they can comment to their past selves and adjust their goals or reflect on them. A lot can change in those formative years, especially when you just kind of tuck that goal away and revisit it.
A lot can change when you're a high school senior.
Okay, now this is maybe the most ninja feature of all. This is our last trick. We're going to pull together some different ideas here. Many times when you start talking about discussions, you talk about small group work. You were in charge of mock trials, right?
In the previous life, yes, I was.
Previous life. So I call this, I debated on the name of this, Joe. For a while it was called mock trials and it was called debate prep. I've stuck with defense versus prosecution. In this, let me explain the scenario first, and then we'll break it apart to see how it works in Schoology, because we need to look at a couple of different parts of the course area. The Marbury versus Madison, hugely important Supreme Court case. This is one of the cases that basically helped the Supreme Court define what its role was, and its role in basically being the defender and last word of the Constitution. When you look at the Constitution, it's kind of funny that they give a lot of detail in many places, but they almost say nothing about how the Supreme Court is supposed to work. And a lot of people say that this case was basically the defining moment for the Supreme Court to define itself as the arbiter of the Constitution and as the final word that would need to be enforced by the executive branch. Now, I want to do a nice debate prep because this was, it was really not a clear-cut case of how this should go. It took a lot of interpretation. There were a lot of personalities involved battling each other. So I want to split my class into two groups, one on the Marbury side and one on the Madison side. And this is a long-term project. I want them to be working on this at least for a week in these small groups. And as homework, I need them to be able to collaborate with each other outside of class time. But I don't want each team to know what the other team is up to. I want this totally like full secrecy for them to have this space to work and collaborate. We are going to accomplish this not only with using the individually assigned feature, but also using the grading groups feature. How many of you respond in the question area? How many of you have never had an opportunity to check out grading groups before?
And we have a question from Heather that we can probably address either when we get to the grading group or...
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone grading groups? So let's break this down, Joe. This is one of my favorite areas. First of all, let's look at this prompt here. Let's look at the defense one. These are the exact same prompt with the difference of what team they're assigned. The way we go about doing this is under our options where the locking is and where the require posts is, we see these three dots. That's our individually assigned area. Now, using this area, I could just assign this to individuals, but if I have a class of 30 students, this is going to take me forever, and I'm going to kind of lose track of who's assigned to what, and not very efficient, right, Joe?
No, not at all.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could just group them together beforehand?
I thought you were going to sing a Beach Boys song.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could listen to had a backing track of the Beach Boys? No, wouldn't it be nice if we could group them beforehand? So let's cancel out of this area. Let's check out our members area where our roster is. Okay. Now we did this in this morning's session. Notice that in my roster, some students are labeled with defense and some pros, or the prosecution. I have two labels over here, defense, prosecution. Well, how did I do that? Let's check it out. I'll delete those and start over. You may have missed this light gray area. It's really easy to miss. Add grading group. A grading group is the idea of having a group inside of your course. Not one of these groups, but a group inside of your course. So here is the defense group. I can jump through this and select students. There we go. And now notice I have a labeled defense here, and people are labeled defense. Now I could have my prosecution, select others, now I have my prosecution. So now when we go back to the discussion post, back to where we were individually assigning, check out what happens. Instead of typing a single person's name like Lincoln, I can just type defense. Now all at once, everyone in that group has been assigned this, and no one in the other group even knows this exists. It's not in the course folder, it's not anywhere. It's totally hidden. And I'll do the same thing with the prosecution. Okay. There we go. Now, grading groups, they can overlap. So you could have defense prosecution teams. You could also have an ESL group. Students don't see the name of the groups at all. It's a very hidden area. You could have all sorts of different groups for different things. The students can be I think as many groups as you need. I don't think there's a limit out there, Joe.
I've tried a lot. I haven't.
Yeah, we haven't hit the limit yet, so I think we're probably pretty good. Now, if we want to take this a step further, Joe, the one thing we haven't talked about is grading. Of course, we can grade discussions, and this is basic training that most people on this call should have had. If you haven't, just email me, leap@schoology.com.
And if I did your basic training, then you definitely did.
Then you definitely did. And we can grade on scales or rubrics. We're not going to go into great detail here, as this is pretty standard stuff in Schoology. But when we combine grading with grading groups, things I think get very interesting. So I just added that to a grading group. Let me just go back to, add to grading, to the group, project, and here's the other one. And what happens here is not only are they working independently, but now when I go to my gradebook, when I score everyone, notice that some people's cells are grayed out. So I'm only going to be grading the people who are assigned that work. And not only that, it's given me some extra drop downs in my gradebook, so I can just jump to everyone who is in the defense and grade everyone. Now if they were all working together and get one grade, I could jump up here and apply grades to everyone. Right? So a lot of cool options. By the way, I always say my favorite gradebook tip. If I'm giving him 100, I can not use my mouse at all. Just hit return and grade really fast. If you let go of your mouse and just navigate through your keyboard, things get really fast in the gradebook. Great. Now, this next idea might actually answer some of the questions that are coming in. What I think is really cool about this is, let's say we've had our now in-person trial, we've done the whole thing, we're wrapping up. As a wrap-up exercise, I could always go into this and take the defense out or flip it with the prosecution. You can change these at any time. So a wrap-up exercise could be to flip the assignments and for everyone basically to pull open the curtain and see what everyone's planning process was. The team that lost, they can actually see what the winner's planning process was and gain some insight of, oh, they were planning this defense the entire time that we were unprepared for. All right, so this, I always talk about seeds, Joe. That was just the seed. What you do after this can get very interesting. But that sort of mock trial or debate, anything like that, great opportunity to learn grading groups in that discussion context. Okay? So as we kind of wrap up our LEAP webinar here, what kind of questions are we seeing? And anyone on the line who has some ideas, there's some real experts on the line here today. Raise your hand if you want to share some tip that you have about using discussions, or a discussion tip or feature that you have found to be really successful.
As far as questions that we have right now, there's one that went back to the YouTube video that you had in the big reveal.
Oh yeah, great.
And how would a student be able to insert a video in their discussion response?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that in the discussion response for the student, the comment area. There, the insert content is what, link, equation, and symbol there?
Well, here's the trick, is when you go into, let's go into, actually any of these just for the purposes of demonstration. This is a this is a really funny one. This is for younger students, simply what happened before this picture is taken, and respond to someone else's prediction to what would happen after.
It's only for younger students, because I could play around with that right now.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why I was up too late during this presentation, is that I thought this was so funny. This is from New York Times, posted a bunch of pictures that were good discussion starters. Anyway, when a student posts, notice how they have this link here, though. It asks for a link, but you can also put in an embed code. So when your students go out to YouTube, and let's find anything, TED Talks. There we go. I right-click that and just copy the embed code, or I can go down to the share link, and instead of grabbing that normal share link, I can grab the embed code here, and those will actually take in this area.
There was another part to that question.
Yeah, so when I save this, and then that video is embedded. So that's a nice way to do presentations, but you could also just add the link too.
What else we got here? There's a couple grading groups questions. Great. One that pertains to how a grading group, with the transfer into SIS as far as grade pass back.
Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an SIS expert here.
It depends on SIS.
It depends on the SIS.
Yeah.
Some SISs will take individually assigned work and just, I believe, add it as basically a null or blank score into the SIS.
And I believe Power School, eSchool will take those in create columns for them, but add null values for those that were not.
Right. So they won't impact someone's grade like as a missing or a 0, but they will, I think, add something. You know who? It's great to ask Schoology support about any SIS integration question, because they're just technical wizards with every single scenario. Or if you're still in implementation, your implementation manager or client success manager can also help with those very specific SIS questions, because they do behave a little bit differently from each other, depending on how the SIS themselves can support or not support individually assigned work.
All right. I think we have a really good question here that I think we hopefully have a very helpful answer for, and it's how do you quickly at a glance see who participated in a discussion post and who didn't?
Great question. Let me pop into a different course here with more responses. There are a couple of different ways to do that. One, I'll show one of my favorite shortcuts here. There's a little shortcut to all of your discussions on the right-hand side. There we go. If I go into this, I have a couple different options. Right in the discussion post, when I click Highlight Users, very good tool. This allows me to see how many posts each student posted. So not only who didn't post, but how many times everyone posts. For instance, if I select Pam's name, Schoology will highlight all of her posts so I can really quickly scroll down and see all of them. By the way, this works really well on mobile. If you're grading on mobile, sorry, specifically on iOS. And then I have a not submitted section here of everyone else who hasn't participated yet. Now, I can't select them because obviously they are not there, and sometimes at the end of the day, you just want to give people zeros who did not participate, something like that, or apply low score, or contact them, something like that. Here's my shortcut. Leave discussion, go right to your grade book.
You're just looking in the grading cell under that grading column for the particular discussion question and looking for the discussion question icon in the top right-hand side of that grading cell. If it's there, they participated. If it's not, they have yet to participate. And you can see that on Bradley's grade book with the test of the Seeing Stars grade column. Grace has not submitted, I can tell, even though not because she doesn't have a grade in there, but because the green puzzle piece is not in the top right-hand corner.
Exactly.
And whereas Logan has submitted his test, but he hasn't received a grade yet.
Absolutely. And for instance, if I scored everyone in the discussion, here's my other favorite shortcut, Joe. I don't really even need to look at those icons because, well, I scored everyone except Pam and David, which means to me that they didn't participate. So I can click this shortcut in the grade column and mark empty cells as missing, and that will set a 0 in those cells. So I don't even have to go through individuals. I can just set all the empty cells as missing, and I'm done with my grading.
Absolutely.
And that missing, that 0 will actually carry over to SISs.
We got a shared discussions question here.
Great. Who has the question about shared discussions?
That was Kathy. Can you merge sections that have a major chat with all of your sections?
That's a tricky one. There is such a feature as, let me show you where it is. Don't get too excited because you can only use this in very, very specific ways. When you first create a discussion, if your discussion is not linked at all, if your course is not linked at all, when you first make a discussion, not when you edit it later, but when you first create it, you'll see the shared discussion option, and that, if you check out our Help Center, our articles about shared discussions, it'll walk you through the details of this, but this will allow you to basically have a discussion in multiple courses, so students from different sections can participate in one discussion thread, but it is very specifically limited to sections that aren't linked. Okay, so if you're doing section linking, where you're managing a bunch of course sections in one course shell, you can't do shared discussions at this point. I know it's on the, it's a big feature request.
Yeah.
It's a very cool feature, but it's very specifically limited to non-linked discussions.
And if your sections aren't linked at the current period of time, that you're not only limited to sharing them with your own courses, you can share that code out too.
Yeah, that's true. If you're an interdisciplinary teacher and are working throughout very different courses with arts and language and all sorts of things, yeah, you could share that discussion with actually a totally different teacher, which gets pretty interesting. But again, not in linked sections, which a lot of you use.
And I just want to throw some comments out there. John says that we use discussions as a way for students to provide constructive feedback on each other's projects. Students submit through the Schoology assignment, and then the instructors post them into a discussion. Students must then provide feedback using prompts from the instructor.
Yeah, very cool, Joe.
And then
I'm going to just send that to everyone so you can all read that. Great, and we are at a little past 5 here, so I think the discussions are wrapping up here. And a lot of people are jumping off the line. You need to get back to class or get home, depending on what you're doing. Life in general. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. We will make all of these presentations available to you. If you did not get it beforehand, I'm actually going to just pop this URL into the chat window here, and you should be prompted to make a copy. The idea with this kind of presentation, we'll keep doing some of these at LEAP, is we want to be able to provide you all the assets that you might need to turnkey this training if you want to just turn this around and provide it at your own organization to help teach some of these cool hidden features while creating really intriguing kind of content. So if you have any further questions, email me, leap@schoology.com. We'll get right to me. Joe, I want to thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all as well for joining and participating so heavily in the discussion area in GoToWebinar. Until next time, next month, third Thursday of the month, have great educational experiences and keep transforming education.